Record. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today on this it's a beautiful day today in Manchester. The sun is shining. I've been out on my bike. So yeah, it's been really nice. So now we have got two brilliant people, two fabulous guests who are going to have a conversation with me today. I'm going to say it's all about relationships, loving, abusive. It's about relationships. So my guest today is Marcia Hylton. Hi, Marcia. And I have got Nigel Beckles as well. Nigel, did I pronounce it correctly?
Yeah, Beckles is correct.
Excellent. Okay, so guys, what I usually do is I introduce you both, but your bios are just, woo! You are just some amazing people who are doing some fantastic work. So I would like you to introduce yourselves to our audience today. So Marcia, please introduce yourself.
Okay. Marcia. Okay.
Oh, Marcia, hang on a minute. We can't hear you. What's happening? We've just done a sound check and it's like, what? Yes, I can hear you a little bit better now.
Can you? I might just put my headphones in, that might work better.
Right, okay. Okay, you just came back then, you were fine.
Let me just try this. Right, can you hear me all right?
Perfect, Marcia. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm Marcia Hylton. I am a nurse by background, and I retrained as a physician associate. Now that is a new profession, relatively new in the UK, is where we practice medicine. I also am a mum. I'm a single mum. I've got 3 kings and 5 grandkids who I love dearly, and I also do work with women who have suffered from narcissistic abuse. So I'm all about the healing and recovery of that, of women who experience that. And I've also relatively recently launched a podcast all about that as well, called Free to Be Me. So that's me in a nutshell.
Excellent, Marcia. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. And yeah, we've got lots to talk about, lots. But Nigel, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Nigel Beckles. I'm the author of the book, How to Avoid Making the Big Relationship Mistakes. I'm also just finished another book, How to Avoid Abusive Relationships, which will be published later this year. I am a certified relationship coach, speaker, workshop facilitator, and relationship specialist. I do podcasts, which keep me very busy. And I'm also a contributor to the award-winning movie documentary, Looking for Love.
Okay, wow. That sounds amazing, Nigel. Thank you so much for sharing, guys. I so appreciate that. So Marcia, can I come straight over to you and let's get straight into this conversation of why we're here today and why we want to share this conversation with everybody. So we're talking about relationships. So in your relationship, when did you know it was narcissism? What made you think about?
I actually didn't know necessarily. I knew that there was something not quite right. I didn't know initially. It was only after the breakup, and I actually stumbled across the term narcissist and researched it and realized that that was what I was dealing with. My ex actually did say he was, so but I didn't understand what that meant, even though I'm coming from a health background. I have some knowledge on mental health, and for me, a narcissist is somebody who is very extra, in your face kind of thing, and that's not how he appeared. So to me, it was a case of, well, we're all narcissistic to some degree in a healthy way. So, and because he didn't present in that way, I didn't take much notice.
Yeah, yeah, no,
Yeah.
I can
So
understand
it was all
that.
very subtle. Yeah, yeah.
I didn't really know anything about narcissism, you know. And so, Nigel, can you just touch on that? Can you give us a little, what about yourself? Why are
Well,
why are you talking about this?
well, we'd be here all evening. But to cut a long story short, a lot of people who have been involved with narcissists don't actually realize what they've been involved with until it's all over. So in terms of Marcia's experience and my own, that is quite common. A lot of people end up doing a lot of research in the aftermath, trying to figure out exactly who they've been dealing with, what they were dealing with, and what it was all about. But I've been studying narcissists and narcissism now for the best part of 15 years, off and on. And that in part has been motivated by the fact that one of my parents had quite strong narcissistic personality traits in a negative way. So that's how my journey kind of began, really.
So did you find yourself in one of these, did you find yourself in a narcissistic relationship?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. But to mirror Marcia's experience, I didn't really understand I was dealing with a covert narcissist, which are the worst, until after the event. But as the saying goes, the toxic monster you see at the end is who they really are. But you don't necessarily find out who they really are until it's all over.
Wow. So there's lots of different names for narcissists. So you were saying about bombing. What's that? I've got a list of different names. So I just want you to run through some of the names we call. Go on, Marcia.
When you say bombing, do you mean, did you mean the love bombing?
Love bombing.
Mean?
Yes, love bombing.
Okay. So that's usually something that happens at the beginning of a relationship with a narcissist. They will, the term love bombing comes from the fact that if you in a relationship and it starts very quickly, they will come on very strong. They will, buy you gifts. You are the best thing since sliced bread. And they treat you, well, I was treated like a queen, and everybody around who knew us, thought we were the ideal couple. It was very intoxicating kind of relationship at the beginning, but that normally happens in any relationship anyway. At the beginning of a relationship, you have all the, the good feelings, and that you think that's normal, but they go the extra mile. They will really go the extra mile to lock you down very quickly, and that's what's called love bombing. So you don't even have time to if there were red flags, you're going to skim past them very quickly because they're going to be just basically absorbing you. They'll be calling you every day. You'll get, as soon as you wake up, you'll get a text to say, I love you, or something like that. They will call you often. They will, bombard you with presents. It's just lovely, actually, right in the beginning.
Yeah.
And that's a way to lock you in. And when they once you are secure, they think that you're secure in that relationship, then things start to change a little bit. There is this thing called the sort of narcissistic cycle of abuse, and I know Nigel will be able to, to talk a bit about that as well. But that's the beginning. That's usually the kind of the first part of the cycle is the love bombing, and it happens really quickly. Before you know it, you're in a relationship. They'll probably tell you that they love you within 2 weeks of meeting or something like that. So it's quite intense. It's an intense thing that happens right at the beginning. That's lovely. What do you think,
Nigel? What do you think?
Well, effectively, love bombing is a grooming tactic, very similar to how a paedophile will groom a target or a victim of abuse. So they will, lots of gifts, lots of declarations of love, lots of, oh, you're my soulmate, all of that very quickly. And the reason why a lot of people don't actually recognize they're being love bombed is because they're too busy getting swept off their feet. They're too busy falling in love. So they basically get sucked into a premature relationship. And then, as Marcia says, they do have a very particular relationship cycle. So the love bombings tactic is part of what they call the idealization stage of when they are basically grooming a target effectively.
Wow. But then, so the person who's there, they're just in this relationship because it's just starting out, and they're just thinking everything's all nice and cozy and just loving it. So when does it get to the stage where something, what actually happens? How do you know it's a narcissist?
Well, you're not going to know at that stage, are you?
Okay.
Because going back to the love bombing, I mean, basically what they're doing, they're getting you high on what they call happy chemicals. So your happy chemicals are happy hormones, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, endorphins. So they get you addicted to, pleasure, approval, and feeling that you're really special and you've met your soulmate. And then they eventually will switch, because while they're love bombing you, they're also studying you. It's all very calculated.
Wow.
So while they're love bombing you and flattering you, they're also paying attention to what your vulnerabilities or insecurities may be, so they can then use those against you at a later date. And they will use it against you at a later date. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I do understand that. So then what happens then when, that person finds out, that they're in this relationship and it's not really working out for them? What happens? Talk me through the different stages of that.
When once you are locked into, from the love bombing, and you're locked into this relationship, the narcissist has you locked in, they know that you're not going anywhere, then the cycle moves over to the devaluation, what is termed the devaluation stage. So this is the stage now where the target or the victim suddenly knocked off the pedestal that they thought they were on. So now things are not quite what they would seem anymore. So what would be good points about you that the narcissist liked initially would now be something that they would pick on you with. So for example, I mean, a crazy example might be, let's say, your hair's long, they love that about you initially. Eventually it's like, oh, your hair would suit you better if it was short, or a dress that you had, oh, I love doing that dress, last week, and then this week it's, oh, I don't really like that dress, why are you wearing that? I'm just using that as an example, but it'd be little things that they start to devalue and start to knock your confidence, and you're there thinking, what's going on? And it's these little drip things that go on over a period of time that actually wears down your self-esteem and your self-confidence.
Wow. So is that what inspired you then to do the podcast, what you've done?
Yeah, I think over a period of time, it got worse. And sometimes I just didn't even know where I was anymore. I didn't even know. It got to the point where I actually lost a sense of who I was. I didn't even know who I was again. And it wasn't until after we'd split and then I started looking into this and realized actually what I was actually dealing with. It took time to actually get over as well, because it takes time. This is not like a normal breakup where you're with someone, you break up, you feel miserable for a bit, maybe eat ice cream, watch sad movies or whatever, and then you get over it. You still might even be friends with your ex, This is completely different. This is something that is actually quite devastating. It really is something that, you know, and I'm sure Nigel will touch on this a little bit, but, you know, you are actually trauma bonded to this person. You know, Nigel was saying earlier on that it's a grooming.
Yeah.
It's a grooming process that happens. And there is such a thing as the Stockholm Syndrome, where I think it was these women that were taken hostage or something by these guys, and when they were rescued, I think one of them paid for bail for one of the people that kept them hostage, and the other one married the other one. But it's this trauma, and they call it the Stockholm Syndrome, because they had this attachment to their abusers. So in a similar way, when you are a victim of narcissistic abuse, there is this kind of trauma bonding. So it's very difficult to kind of let go in the same way that you would do in a normal breakup. But it impacts on you in a different way. It's very, very damaging, really, really crippling. So it did take a while, and you know, it's not something that happened overnight for me, but there was a lot of learning, there was a lot of reading and researching around it. And whilst I was doing the reading and the researching around it, I realised that so many people were suffering, so many women were suffering. And when you had conversations with people, it was starting to, you know, for me, it was like, wow, it's not just me, you know, because there's, you know, for me, it was like really, you know, it hit hard. It was like, this is not something that I wanted to speak to anyone about, because nobody would believe half the things that I would say. But when you start to talk to people and understand and do the research and read other people's experiences, or speak with people with similar experiences, you realise, wow, this thing is huge. And people are unaware of what is happening to them. So that inspired me. That inspired me to want to start to help and to start to educate women, because that's primarily my target group. That's my tribe, as it were. So it was really to kind of raise awareness about how, you know, how damaging this is, and actually to look at how you can avoid that. And if you do find yourself in that, what kind of tools you can use to help yourself to move forward, and to get the healing that you need to move on.
No, that's brilliant, Marcia. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's brilliant. So Nigel, from a male's point of view, how did you find yourself in this relationship, and what did you actually do to, you know, to heal yourself, to move forward?
Well, as I was saying earlier about grooming, I mean, effectively, I was groomed, effectively.
What did you actually do to, you know...
Oh, sorry.
Go on, that's all right. Sorry, Nigel, go ahead.
Yeah, I was approached at an event I was participating in. I was facilitating a workshop, and the person approached me, clutching up my book in their hand, saying, "Oh, I really love your book, blah, 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 blah." And there's something in the grooming process at the beginning, it's called induced conversation. Okay. So we would say normally, you see somebody you like, the term is chat them up, as it were, which is quite innocent and quite normal. But with a narcissist, it's a different ball game, because often they've actually researched you, whether you're known or not known as such. But if they've got their eye on you, they will research you. They'll be looking at your Facebook page, your Instagram, etc. So when they do approach you, they've got an idea of what you're about anyway. Right. These people are very calculating. Right. But as Marcia says, at the end of the day, you don't really know what's going on until it's all over. And people might say to me, well, Nigel, you're supposed to be a relationship specialist, relationship expert, inverted commas, etc., etc. Trust me, I have spoken to coaches, therapists, psychologists who've all fallen prey to a narcissist. Wow. Or a narcissistic abuser. So when people say, oh, I would never be involved in an abusive relationship, oh, that will never happen to me. Never say never. Yeah. Because the thing with abusive relationships, whatever type of abuser it is, abusive relationships are generally insidious. it's a slow cooking process. It's like if you dropped a frog into a hot pot of water, the frog will jump straight out. You drop that frog into a cold pot of water and heat up that water slowly, the frog will be cooked because it doesn't know what's happening. And that's very similar to an abusive relationship, because abusers don't roll up to you with a label on their forehead saying, I'm an abuser.
No.
Quite often they're very charismatic. Quite often they're very charming, which is part of how they hook the target in.
Wow.
Absolutely.
So then what made you, have you spoken to men? Have different men been in this situation? Have they opened up to you? Do you deal with just women? Who do you deal with?
Well, I deal with everyone. I mean, I co-created a Facebook group several years ago called Reflections on Abusive Relationship, and it's got 21,000 plus members now. So, and I belong to other support groups as well. But going back to your question about men have different challenges effectively, because guys are not brought up as boys to express their emotions. So boys are brought up generally being told, big boys don't cry, man up, and they suppress their emotions. So there's something called the guy code. So guys often just stick to certain subjects like sports, like cars, like what's happening at work. They won't necessarily express any emotions to their friends or their peers because they don't want to appear to be weak. They don't want to be judged as lacking in masculinity and stuff like that. So then when you follow that timeline, then you look at the fact that 2/3 of men commit suicide at a higher rate than women.
Wow.
So there are a lot of guys out there who are suffering and just suppressing their like emotions and feelings. And guys are very reluctant to discuss things. I mean, on my podcast series, I've had, let me think, about 12 different guests I've had on my podcast series who are survivors of domestic abuse, narcissistic relationships, including our dear Marcia. And Marcia was so eloquent when I interviewed her. I actually split her interview into 2 parts. I am yet to find a guy to come on an interview about being in an abusive relationship. Still, you know, I invite men, and some of them will say, yeah, I'm up for it, but then they disappear. So I even offer guys and women, actually, if they want to come on my podcast and discuss their experiences, I offer them, you know, you can go anonymous, you can use a fake name, etc.
Yeah.
But yet to find a guy to come and talk. I recently started a Facebook group for men only, called Male Survivors of Relationship Abuse. And that's only probably got, 134 members. But again, trying to get guys to even talk online is a struggle at the moment. But that's probably because of the low membership numbers. But I do belong to a group called Male Survivors of Narcissistic Abuse, and that has about 3,500 members. And many of the members in there, many of the members in there are quite vocal. You know, they share their stories, they share what they're going through.
Yeah, which is really good, and that's what we need. We need more awareness from men and women, you know, because I didn't know about this subject. It was only when I spoke to Marcia, and I was telling Marcia, I was saying this relationship I was in, and I was saying it's so funny because this man, 1 minute he's happy, next minute he's sad, and it's like, I don't understand this guy. What is going on? And then I was telling Marcia more, and when Marcia was saying to me, you need to be looking into this. And you know what? It was just like, wow, it's the penny dropped, and it just all made sense. So we need more awareness. You know, we need to be out there and talking more about it, because when those red flags are in your face, you know, sometimes you don't want to see them. You know something's not right, but you don't want to stand up to that. So it's all right coming out of the relationship and looking at it now. But how, Nigel, you was talking about you work with, you doing workshops. So how do you get people to not go into those sort of relationships? What sort of work do you do with those people? With women or men?
Well, generally, well, men or women, at the end of the day, first thing you've got to look at is your personal boundaries. That's the first thing. Because if you've got weak personal boundaries or you're a bit of a people pleaser, then you're going to be susceptible to get involved with an abuser. So it's not a gender thing. It's having effective personal boundaries. It's also about checking yourself out. Because again, if you've been involved with a abusive relationship previously, you might more have a tendency to get involved with one again. A person might have low self-esteem, for example. They may have been brought up in a home where they witnessed domestic abuse and they confuse abuse with being loved. So there's a lot of self-work that needs to be done for some people to make sure they don't find themselves in those type of situations. At the end of the day, from what I observe, a lot of people go into relationships with emotional baggage. They go into relationships looking for unpaid therapy because basically they haven't dealt with their own stuff.
Yeah.
And all that happens, if you've got unhealed wounds, if you've got unhealed emotional baggage and you go into a relationship, sooner or later that baggage is going to come out in the relationship, one way or another. Yeah. And for those who haven't healed their emotional wounds, what you will observe is they just change partners.
Yeah.
But the actual, their issue has not been resolved.
Mm-hmm.
So they just go from one partner to the other. So, but it's just, they're just in a cycle. And you'll also notice that there are certain people who will go from one abusive relationship to another. So until they heal those patterns within themselves, that is what is going to happen to them on a repeated basis.
It's like, no, I just wanted to pick up on the point that you were making about having boundaries. And I think sometimes, you know, it's like, well, what does that even mean? You know, when we're talking about boundaries, you know, and I think sometimes it might be, you know, if we think about some of the values that we have and, you know, so for example, a boundary might be you're with a partner, you know, you're not expecting them to cheat. You know, so if that's a boundary that you have, that could be one where, you know, if they know, the person knows that right at the beginning, that happens, you're out. But sometimes when we have weak boundaries, we allow that, we allow it and allow it and allow it. And that's when, you know, you're going to get abused. I think also if people are undermining you, diminishing you, having a boundary to say, well, actually, that's unacceptable. You know, you don't accept, you know, don't accept those things. It's very difficult as well with narcissistic relationships because it's a drip thing. It's a drip thing. So you're not actually, it's not sort of in your face instantly. So it might be, you know, you're in the love bombing situation, you know, and then you're moving into the deval, and it might be, it's a slow thing. So it's not like you wake up one day and you're suddenly devalued. It's a process. So it might be something like, for example, or I you know, I don't think that friend is good for you. I think you need to, you know, drop her or him or something like that. You know, and so it's very insidious. So it's having your boundaries to say, well, these are my friends. I will do, you know, I'm going to go, you know, they try and stop you from seeing them, or, you know, they have to accompany you everywhere you go, you know, and actually you can go by yourself. So it's keeping your independence and making sure that your boundaries are strong. So when we're talking about boundaries, it's kind of knowing what your values are, what it is that you're going to tolerate and what you're not going to tolerate, and to really stick with those. And be clear, actually. And again, it's about, because we don't always know, we just kind of float along with everything because, you know, it's, started off well, and you think this person is well-meaning and wants the best for you, so you'll go along with that. But you know, it's about picking up some of those red flags, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later, that could point to problems ahead.
Yeah, no, let's talk about the red flags, because there's when those red flags hit you and you don't want to, well, you don't want it because you're in this relationship and no, it can't be, something can't be wrong, it's got to be good. So when do you actually take notice of those red flags? And what do the red flags mean?
Well, you take notice as soon as possible, really. But you have to look at what is acceptable at the end of the day. So red flags could be a variety of things. Say someone is prone to sulking if they don't get their own way, or they're prone to giving you the silent treatment if they don't get their own way, or if they appear to be excessively selfish, or they're always about me, or they're excessively self-absorbed. Those are just a few red flags. But you know, some red flags are big, some red flags are not so big. You know, some red flags are very subtle. But as Marcia said, and I said before, you know, abusive relationships are very insidious, because one of the things that hasn't been mentioned yet is the abusive relationships are about power and control. That's the bottom line. How an abuser will go about trying to assert that power and control. Well, obviously they've got different tactics and different strategies to make you succumb to what they want you to do, basically.
Yeah.
So there isn't a one size fits all. And then the other thing to look at, if you're looking at narcissistic relationships, they are all very predictable because they all follow a very particular cycle. So the idealization stage, so that's phase 1, the evaluation stage, which we've covered, which is stage 2, then the discard phase, which is stage 3, which is where they basically get rid of you. And often they will ghost their partner, won't tell them why they've left or when they're leaving, why they're leaving, etc.
Wow.
So yeah, but there are various red flags to consider. And if you're dealing with someone and you keep catching them in lying, that's a red flag. If they're exceeding egotistical, well, that's a red flag. If they don't take responsibility for their behavior, well, that's a red flag. You know, so there's a long list of what is or what could be considered a red flag.
Yeah, I think for me it was the control thing. Why they wanted to. There's all of a sudden you couldn't do things for yourself, and it's like you needed that person to do them. It's like, I'm a big girl, I can manage it by myself. So yeah, it was all of that, you know. And then when they want to take that power from you, that control, then it's like you're going to lose your independence, like you just said. And no, I wasn't playing.
Absolutely.
So yeah. So you know, like where do we go forward then? You know, so you're doing a lot of support work, Marcia, and yourself, Nigel. So when you're working with women and men, what sort of tips, what sort of things, how are you advising them to move forward?
I think for me, one of the first things in terms of healing, especially right at the beginning, in order for you to move on and to start the healing process, in my opinion, and this is, you know, in my opinion, this is the best thing, you have to go no contact. That is key to your healing. No searching up on their social media, no responding to, you know, messages that they may send, no calling them, no running them down, none of those things, because it keeps you bonded. It doesn't allow you to heal. And the narcissist, if you're doing that, will use that as well, because they won't allow you to, they won't give you closure. If you're looking for them for closure, forget it. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. You have to find because a lot of the time, you are actually, when you are in, it's not even a relationship that you're in. Somebody referred to it as a situationship or a manipulationship, right? They don't actually want to, you know, when they discard or move on, they haven't actually left you completely. They've gone on to play something else. You have to remember that sometimes emotionally, these people, whether they're male or female, emotionally are very, very immature. They do not know how to be in an adult, normal relationship, unfortunately. And it's like a child with a toy. They fling down the toy when they're ready, you know, and then they go get a new toy and play with that. But make anybody try and pick up this other toy. Or they might decide, oh, I want to play with that toy again because this one is not doing what I want it to do. So I'll go back to that other toy. So that's what it's like. So this is the whole cycle. They'll come back and do the whole thing over again. And you are not going to heal. You need to make that complete break. And I understand that not everybody's going to be able to do that. If you've got kids or some other reason why you need, you know, you have to have contact with them. You need to kind of go what they term grey rock. And I know Nigel will be able to talk to you a bit more about that, but just grey rock, you know, so it's kind of make yourself as boring as possible. Yes and no answers. You don't have to engage. And that's, to me, that's the very first part of healing. You need to make that break. You need to make that break. Find out. I'm all for, you know, doing the research. Find out, read, find out what happened to you. What I would say is don't get caught up in this whole reading, and then you get stuck in that. But it's just to help you to understand what's happened to you, and then and then you move on. And it's about you've got to do the inner work. The inner work is what is going to help you. Look at the things that, you know, understand why you behave the way that you do. Get the help that you need, whether that be, you know, going to see a counsellor, going to see a coach, going to, you know, get in therapy to help you past that, because a lot of the time there's a lot of damage that's caused. And Nigel will know this as well. You know, there is something, I forgot what it's called now, but, you know, this kind of emotional damage and psychological damage actually does actually alter the brain. There's a thing called neuroscience that shows that damage can be caused through trauma, emotional trauma, and it can be healed, but that healing process has to happen so that you develop new neural pathways so that you're able to function normally, and you need to be able to heal to move on. That's
Nigel,
that's one thing that I'd say.
No, thank you, Marcia. And Nigel, yourself, what are your opinions on that? How do you
Well, obviously in the ideal world, prevention is better than cure, isn't it? And obviously the vast majority of survivors of abusive relationships, they knew very little about red flags and love bombing and all the rest of it. So part of the research in the aftermath is to do with understanding what has happened. Part of the research is also about making sure as much as possible that it doesn't happen to you again, or anyone else for that matter. So, and I always go back to, like, again, personal boundaries, knowing yourself. I mean, my first book, the first part of the book is really about self-development. It talks about emotional intelligence, talks about personal boundaries, talks about the science of love, because when people are busy falling in love, they don't actually understand there's a scientific process within that process. So, for example, women have a high percentage of the hormone called oxytocin. So oxytocin is known as the cuddling drug. So when a woman breastfeeds or when she has an orgasm, she releases oxytocin. Even when she's holding hands with her partner, she's releasing the oxytocin, which is a bonding hormone. So that bonds the woman more to our partner, whereas a guy has more testosterone, you know, get up and go and action. etc. So it's a lot to take in. And as Marcia says, I'm a researcher. So, I like finding out new things, but you can get, I suppose, trapped in the research cycle as well, because you want to find out everything about it, which is not necessarily healthy. You just really need to find out enough to protect yourself. And as Marcia said, if you need to do some self-work, work on yourself, kind of find out what may be making you vulnerable to getting involved with an abuser. Say, for example, you may have codependent tendencies. So as a child, you may have ended up being the caretaker to the parent. So say the parent had a mental health issue or drug abuse issue. So the roles are reversed. So basically the child becomes a caretaker. But then when that child becomes an adult, it's quite possible they're going to want to caretake their partner. And if the partner is abusive, because abusers are basically takers, and the codependent is basically a giver. So they find themselves trapped in this relationship where there's not an equal give and take. So it really is about knowing yourself and kind of looking at yourself. And as Marcia says, if you need to, coaching is not really appropriate. You'd have to see a therapist, because really a therapist or a counselor is about unpacking issues from the past. A coach is about setting personal goals for the future. So,
So do you think it's the same as, domestic violence? How different is it to domestic violence? Because there's physical and there's mental. So how different is it?
Well, sorry, Marcia. Let me just jump in quickly.
No, I mean, Nigel might have a different take on it, but I think for me, there are two different. It comes under domestic violence, but it's two different things. Like for me, domestic violence is something that happens in intimate relationships. When we think of domestic violence, we think of a partner beating up or whatever on their part, their significant other or children or whatever. So it's contained within the home. Whereas with narcissistic abuse, that can happen anywhere. It can happen in your relationships. It can happen in the workplace. It can be your friends. It can be anybody can abuse somebody else narcissistically. It just so happens that we're talking about romantic relationships. But I have in the past, many years ago, well, not that long ago, maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I had a boss that was narcissistic, and that was a terrible, terrible experience for me. I didn't know. It's only now that I realise that she was a narcissist, and I'm glad I was able to get out in one piece. But that was not great. It's not a great experience. So for me, that's the difference.
Right.
Narcissistic abuse is more emotional. It's they're a bit more Then they're not going to be necessary. I'm not saying that they don't get physical, but more often than not with narcissistic abuse, it's more the emotional and mental, psychological.
Okay. And yourself, Nigel, what's your point?
Well, obviously domestic violence exists, but I tend to use the term domestic abuse because effectively that covers everything. That covers emotional, psychological, mental, and physical.
Yeah.
So I tend to use the term domestic abuse. And in terms of emotional abuse and mental abuse, I consider it worse actually than physical abuse in some aspects, because recovering from mental and emotional abuse can take a long time. Some people don't recover at all, sadly. And it's kind of like a clueless crime, if you like, because if someone hits you and gives you a bruise or a black eye or a cut, there's evidence of what has happened. With emotional and mental abuse, there's no evidence, which is why I'm happy that the UK introduced coercive control legislation. So there doesn't have to be any physical abuse, because obviously that covers emotional and mental abuse as well. And even things like financial abuse. So you're living with a partner and they're controlling all the finances, which A, is wrong, and B, it's going to make it more difficult for you to leave because you haven't got the financial resources to, you know, consider what your options are. You know, so abuse covers a lot of different areas.
Yeah, no, very, very interesting. It's just like, I'm just like, sorry, I'm drawn in to like both of what you're saying. It's just like, it's just so interesting and just so fascinating. I just hope that, I hope the listeners are getting lots of information, lots of tips. You know, if you are suffering in any way or you want to speak to somebody, you know, please, you know, reach out to us because we're here to support. And Nigel, if people wanted to get in touch with yourself, how would they get in touch with you?
Oh, wow. My Facebook page, I'm on Facebook. I've got an author page. My email is beckles13@hotmail.com. But if they just Google Nigel Beckles or author Nigel Beckles, they will find me. I'm easy to find online.
Good. But so Nigel, you know, you were saying about your support groups and how, you know, so do you have a lot of support groups? Are you still working with people now to move forward? You're talking about...
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, the support group I created with a friend of mine several years ago, we have a great admin team. It's a very busy group, and I certainly couldn't manage the group on my own. It would be impossible. So I've got to give respect due to the admin team. But I only have one support group, and that's more than enough. I mean, I've got other groups, etc. But 21,000 members, a lot of who are active, is more than enough. But I belong to other support groups as well. And so I see stories every day. I give advice online when I can. I have coaching clients, not necessarily people who've been involved with abuse. If that were the case, if someone approached me about being abused, I would signpost them to someone who specializes in, who's qualified to deal with that. If they want to approach me about relationship coaching, yeah, that's fine, not a problem, because I'm a certified relationship coach, so I'm qualified to do that. But all you can really do with someone who's been abused, obviously give them the support you can give, and signpost them to whatever resources you think that will be helpful for them. I mean, I belong to an organization called Survivor Provider Services, where we go into, well, before COVID, we would go into organizations and hold workshops advising employees, you know, let's say for like signs a colleague may be in an abusive relationship, and what type of support as a colleague you could, you know, provide in helping them and supporting them. But then again, you know, it's not a one size fits all situation, because as I said, there are different types of abuse. So the abuse could be emotional, mental, it could be financial, it could be the fact that they're abusive or intimidating. They may be isolating the person, as Marcia mentioned earlier, or economic abuse. So there are lots of different aspects to an abusive relationship. So you kind of really have to look at the individual circumstance.
Yeah. And do you feel that, you know, you said one of your missions is to help as many people as you can so they don't make those mistakes? So can they find all that information in your books? Is that what your books are about?
My second book, my first book was more geared to self-development and finding a healthy relationship and red flags to an extent. The second book will be specifically about abusive relationships and toxic personalities, and obviously red flags, different personality types, again, boundaries, which are important. So yeah, this one is going to deal with abusive relationships and toxic personalities.
Yeah.
And hopefully it will help people, because I write my books to help people. In part, my podcasts are about helping people. I mean, I think Marcia and I have done 3 episodes on narcissists and narcissistic abuse. And the first one, which was back in August, I think, yeah, that's got over 300 views now on YouTube.
Wow, fantastic.
So that's 300 people that maybe have been given a little bit more knowledge and have raised their awareness than would have been previously.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. So, well, if you could give any tips to anybody, what would your 3 tips be?
Ask Marcia first.
No, I'm asking you. They're just starting out in a relationship and everything's all nice and flowery and falling in love and yeah. But even before they got to that stage, what tips would you give to that person?
Don't be rushed into a relationship, first of all, because with abusers, whether they're a narcissist or not, but with many abusers, they want to rush the target into the relationship as quickly as possible.
Okay.
So if someone's love bombing you and telling you like within 2 weeks, oh, you're my soulmate, oh, I've never met anybody like you, pay attention. Because at the end of the day, you're most likely being set up. Because when you think about a normal relationship, how it progresses, it's not usually a rush, or it's not like swift. You know, usually you take time, you go on dates, you get to know the person, etc. So for me, that's a big red flag. If someone's trying to rush you into a commitment, or they want to move in with you after a month, then that's a big red flag.
Yeah.
And again, sometimes it's just looking out for those little signs, or sometimes big signs. Pay attention.
Yeah.
You know, pay attention, because I always say, you know, it's very easy to get into a relationship. You could even argue it's very easy to get married. Getting in is one thing. Getting out can be a nightmare. And as the old saying goes, marry in haste, repent at leisure.
Gosh.
Well, you know, relationships are easy to get into.
Yeah.
Really, you know, you've got to pay attention. And the other thing is, which I cover in my first book, is obviously online dating is the big thing. It's been the big thing for a while. I do notice that more mature men and women in particular, they are reluctant to indulge in online dating, which is fair enough, but it's the quickest way to meet somebody. However, again, if you're going to do online dating, you've got to be aware of what you're putting on your profile, for example. So you don't put on your profile, oh, looking for love, easygoing, looking for my soulmate, because predators, relationship predators, they're on those online dating sites too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they are looking for vulnerabilities
Yeah.
On those sites.
Yeah.
And even with social media, narcissists and other types of predators, they love it, because to an extent they can present us a false persona.
Yeah.
So don't assume what you see is necessarily what you're going to be getting.
Yeah, exactly. No, thank you for that. And Marcia, can I ask you, what's your 3 tips to give to somebody?
I think I agree with Nigel. One of them is to be vigilant about the speed of the relationship, and actually check in with how you're feeling. Especially women, they will feel something. Your gut will be telling you. Don't override what your gut says to you. if it's coming up as a red flag, pay attention to how you feel about that. The other thing that I would say as well, listen to the conversations that that you are having with a potential partner. I think if they're saying things like, oh, what's your favorite this, or what's your favorite that, and then they, suddenly they fit everything that you do, oh my goodness, I like that too, so you actually think, my God, this is a fantastic fit because we've got the same interest. I'm not saying that can't happen, but be vigilant about that, because they like Nigel said earlier, they will study you like an encyclopedia. They will study you like you are a psychology degree. They will check and see, and they will just pick and see, ask you things about what you like, and then they will mirror. It's called mirroring. So they will mirror back to you what you want. So that's a time for you to be asking questions. So if they say things like, what's your favorite record or whatever, and you say, I don't know what, whatever it is, and they go, oh yes, ask them questions about it. See if they actually really do know about the subject that they claim that they do. So they will do that. So be mindful of that. So before you jump in and think, oh my God, this person is just my soulmate because everything matches, double check that first. So be vigilant about that. Okay. The third thing that I would suggest as well is to look and see how they're treating you. Like we talked about sort of like silent treatment. Is this person, if they're disapproving, or do they suddenly just stop speaking to you for any reason, or just disappear for weeks on end, or even a week, and you have no explanation? If you're getting on swimmingly and they just suddenly just do that without any explanation, be mindful of that as well. And I think the biggest thing for me is to really listen to your inner, because you will know on some level, we all know on some level whether something is right or wrong. I did, but I chose to, especially as women, we choose to override those because we think, oh, maybe I'm just imagining this. Oh, what are you thinking? Everything's fine. Because on the surface, it does look fine. But listen to your intuition. Yeah.
Wow, that is so true. That is so true, Marcia. And it's true, and Nigel, it's true, because we do know within ourselves, but then for whatever reason, we stop ourselves from, and we just go with it and see what happens. Go with it a little bit longer and see what happens. And before you know it, hook, line and sinker, and it's too late. But no, thank you so much. Sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted one more just to say, like we talked about, one of the things about, if things happen really quickly, it is a big red flag. That's not to say that relationships can't work if they happen quickly, but it's just being mindful of the other things as well. So, just bear that in mind and just be sensible about things, because people do meet, and and it's not long before they get married or whatever, and they have a wonderful relationship. You hear about people that happens to all the time, and to just be mindful of that. We're not saying if it happens quickly, the person's a narcissist. It's just being mindful, so that's not what we're saying. Just be mindful. The other thing, we know, and just to sort of reiterate what Nigel was saying, definitely be careful online. It is swimming with narcissists. I think if you're wanting to go online and to find a reputable one, I think you had a guest many weeks ago, and she was there. Was she? Forgot what her role was, but she had some sort of dating.
Yes, the daisy
program. And I know it might cost money, but you'd be safer doing something like that than going on, because they get vetted, people are being interviewed. So if you really, and you're going to get serious people, because people, I'm sure narcissists ain't going to pay, that kind of money to, so that you're going to be a lot safer. I'm not saying it's completely foolproof, but if you are thinking of being online, just be mindful of the type of sites that you do actually go on, because
No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant advice, and definitely need that. So Marcia, so where can people find you? What sort of work do you do to help people?
Right. So you can find me on via email. So my email is marciahyltonwellness@gmail.com. You can also find me on Facebook. If you want to join, I have a private Facebook group for survivors and people who want to heal and move on. There's also the podcast, but definitely by email. And I've very, very recently started my own business called Life Inspired Wellness. So you can still email me and get me there, but the website is pending, so you'll be able to get me on there as well. And that's all about health and well-being for women. Most of my work would be around coaching, because I'm about moving forward. You've got out of that relationship, so it's about the healing and stepping forward. I'm not necessarily focusing on what's happened, but it's about moving forward. So I'm helping for women who are ready to move forward with their life. That's where I'll be able to help them. So they can get in touch with me, just drop me an email, drop me a DM me if they want to do that as well. So I'll do one-to-one coaching. I'm also looking into doing group coaching as well, so that's coming up soon. And I'm also devising some online courses as well that people can access. They don't want to join the group, but they'll be able to do that. So those are all things that are in the pipeline, up and coming.
Fantastic. That sounds brilliant. And so, you said about your podcast, and one of the questions I want you to ask about the podcast, for people who haven't listened to them, and yourself, Nigel, what sort of information can they find on your podcast, and why would they want to listen? How would it help them?
Okay. Well, in terms of my podcast, as I mentioned earlier, I'll probably interview 12 different ladies who have come out of the other side of an abusive relationship. Well, one lady I interviewed, she was in an abusive marriage for 22 years. So I provide a platform in terms of my podcast to raise awareness effectively, to give survivors a voice, but also to raise awareness and impart useful information. Because I'm all about raising awareness. That is my mission. That is my mission, basically. So whether it's via books or whether it's via a podcast, I'm all about providing useful information. And that's what I'm about.
Good. And yourself, Marcia?
For me, it's similar to Nigel. It's about the sharing of experiences. It is about raising awareness. It's about empowerment. It's about voices. It's about people having the opportunity to share their story, to encourage others to know that they're not on their own, and to see that people recover. And when they hear the stories that people have been through, some of them are quite horrific, and to see that somebody's been able to step out of that. I interviewed somebody relatively recently who was in, children, escaped from the city where she was and moved up north, and ended up with 2 businesses.
Wow.
This is someone who had been, so inspiring, someone who had been in an abusive relationship for, I'm pretty sure she said, and that's in one of my podcasts, I'm sure she said 10 years.
Wow.
And she had children with autism. I'm sure she wouldn't mind me saying that here. But she was able to turn her life around, and is a businesswoman with 2 businesses. So there is life after narcissistic abuse, and that's what that's my message. That's what I want women to understand, because again, primarily I support women. And I did actually, Nigel, I did interview a man.
Oh, well done. You must have used your charm to get him to come on and open up.
So I did have it. So from a male perspective, he shared his story of narcissistic abuse, And actually had a clinical psychologist come on as well. So, and from a clinical perspective as well to get that. So there's different sort of aspects to it, which is, you know, I'd like to think that people will get real benefit from that.
Yeah.
So that was season 1. I'm about to start season 2, and that's going to be much
Fantastic.
more on sort of what you do now to move forward, and some real practical tips to move forward.
No, and that's good, because it's all right telling your story, but for me, you can't stay in that story. You know,
absolutely.
Do different things, you know, and build yourself back up to find that confidence, that self-esteem, because all that's gone. So get all that energy back, you know. And this conversation today has been so deep. It's just been, there's just so much information, and it just really does make your mind think. So I'm glad you said that.
We've only scratched the surface.
Yeah.
We've only just scratched the surface as well. Yeah.
I was going to say exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Because really and truly, you have to think, when you're looking at any type of personality disorder, or even looking at abusers in general, it's how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go?
Yeah.
Right.
How much, you know, because you can go way down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow. So maybe, well, carry on talking. I'm quite happy, because I'm intrigued. I'm like thinking, no, it's just so interesting, and how different it is. And I totally agree with what you were saying as well, Nigel, how different it is from domestic abuse. I like that, rather than violence. Domestic abuse to narcissism, how different it is. But I think, because that, if you, like you said, for domestic abuse, you're going to see those marks. For, you know, mental abuse, you're not seeing those marks. Nobody can see it, you know. But I'm all for about helping those to really recognise that there's more. They've got so much more to offer than being in these abusive relationships. And I know through lockdown, there's been so many. It's crazy. I've got a woman coming on in a couple of weeks, and she's talking about her story, and it's just, I'm fighting the tears back. It's just so emotional. But thank you so much.
Well, there has been an increase in reports of domestic abuse since the lockdown.
Yeah.
And it's really been a double whammy, because in one sense, the victim has been trapped with their abuser due to the lockdown. On the other hand, the support services, the voluntary services, they've been hit by COVID as well in terms of their staff.
Yeah.
So there's been an increase in demand, but there's less capacity to deal with the demand effectively. So that's quite concerning. And I think quickly I should say that we've talked a lot about, leave, get out. But it's not always that simple.
No,
and there's something called trauma bonding, on which Marcia touched on earlier. So trauma bonding is, some people call it Stockholm syndrome, but effectively, the person who's been abused gets bonded to their abuser. And if I had £1 for when I'm online and I'm going through my Facebook newsfeed, and I see people saying, oh, I still love him, I still love her. I know they treated me badly, but I miss them, I want them back. That is effectively trauma bonding. And for someone who's not been through it, in fact, when I see these people talking about they miss their abuser, they don't actually understand they are trauma bonded. They don't know. I can tell because I can see what they're posting. Because if you are missing your abuser, well, who would miss an abuser? If someone was abusing you in a relationship and the relationship's over, why would you still miss that person?
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense, does it? When you look at it on the surface. But when someone's been trauma bonded, and in layman's terms, trauma bonding basically is what they call treat them mean to keep them keen.
Wow.
The technical term is intermittent reinforcement.
Absolutely.
So someone treats you nice, then someone treats you nasty. So someone treats you nice, so it's just a cycle of treating someone nicely, then treating them badly. But the person who's being abused, they get addicted to the good times, or when they're feeling good with that person.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually they begin chasing an illusion, basically, because they're always trying to get back to that kind of honeymoon kind of period of the relationship. So with all the other obstacles to leaving an abusive relationship, especially if you live with them or you've got children with them, trauma bonding is another hurdle many people have to overcome. Because as Marcia said earlier, in terms of no contact, I mean, if someone's trauma bonded, they're going to want contact from their abuser, or they're going to be stalking their abuser, whether physically or online, looking at their Facebook page, etc., etc.
Wow.
So, yeah. And obviously when you're in that type of state of mind, you're not thinking clearly anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And you don't think you can do it by yourself, but you can. You can do it by yourself. You are strong enough to do it. It's about, well, no, it's more.
Well, some support. Well,
yeah, it's more than that.
Some support doesn't hurt. Some support doesn't hurt, because one of the things that abusers are very good at doing is actually isolating their target. So they will seek to isolate you, as Marcia mentioned earlier. So they'll try and get you to cut your friends off or not speak to your family and things like that. Because if a person is isolated with little or no support, the easier they are going to be to control. Because as I said earlier, the aims of an abuser is power and control. So they're always going to be looking for different tactics to isolate and control. But support is important at the end of the day.
Yeah.
You know, especially depending how damaged you've been on an emotional and mental level.
Yeah.
You know, I have, I don't know, I've even been there myself. You know, it took me a little while to kind of get myself back together. But at the end of the day, there's so much support online. People don't have to do it on their own. And I wouldn't want someone to feel that, oh, they've got to do it on their own, because they may not be in the state of mind to do it on their own, to be quite frank.
Yeah.
I mean, some people actually commit suicide because of domestic abuse.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Wow. Okay. Wow. This has been absolutely fascinating subjects. So good. So it's 6:15, guys.
Yeah, I did notice. How time flies.
How time flies. Wow, what an interesting subject. So let's leave on a positive note. Marcia.
Just know that no matter what, you are enough. Okay, so for anybody that is out there who are, you know, in this situation or wanting to leave or need help, just know there is help. There is life after that. If you need help, we are all here to support you. Know that you're enough. You are good enough. Yeah. And you can change your life. So it can be done. It can be done. We did.
Yes.
So there you go.
Nigel, would you like to add?
Well, I think people need to know there is a lot of support out there, a lot of support.
Yeah.
Online, counseling, therapy, there's lots of support out there. So, you know, someone doesn't have to take that journey to escape and then the journey towards healing and recovery on their own. Yeah. It's I suppose the only thing I would say for guys, it's a little bit more difficult, as I was saying earlier, but even in terms of support, because when you think about it, in the UK, there are numerous domestic violence shelters for women. I think there's only one in the UK for guys.
Yeah.
One in the whole of the UK.
Wow.
So, And the other thing that guys struggle with, sometimes even being believed. I've read stories with guys have gone to a police station saying they're being domestically abused, and they've been laughed out of the station, told to man up, sort it out, go home and sort it out, kind of thing. So, but there is support out there for both genders, for both men and women. So don't be afraid to reach out for support. That would be my message.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant, guys. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining this conversation today. Wow, lots of information. But like Nigel and Marcia said, you know, there is lots of support out there. You are beautiful. You are enough. And please, if you need any help, support, reach out. We're going to leave all the comments, not the comments, sorry, we're going to leave Marcia and Nigel's details. You've got my details in once we come off live, and so you can reach out and get in touch with us. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been, wow, it's been really interesting. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to Marcia and Nigel. Stay there, and I will see you guys next week, Sunday, 5 p.m. A totally different subject. Wow.
Yeah.
I've got an amazing woman, and she's just fantastic. So she's coming to talk to us next week, but I will see you then. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
And thank you,
Bye.
Lesleye.